world has learned, whether it's the Houthis and freedom of navigation, or Midnight Hammer, or even securing our southern border. When he says he's going to do it, we do it. So peace through strength has to mean something. And those foreign terrorists who were defeated in the Caribbean were just the beginning of what will happen if foreign terrorist organizations continue to try to poison the American people and kill them in our home.
So to cite the right off the top of the bat as the Houthis in the Red Sea, which we were an utter failure. We did it for about 2 months and then goes, oh, snap, this is too expensive and we're not stopping anything. It continues on to this day. And yet he uses that as an example of peace through strength succeeding. Not sure that you want to go there.
No, I mean, it wasn't a success, was it? Yeah, we know that. Sadly, the two F-18s were lost. And from what I understand from the sort of feedback I've had, you probably had the same. It was pretty intense there. And it's a classic case of you can use your navies to do things, but the best thing you can use them to do is to support troops ashore. So if we've got nobody ashore, then there are limitations and severe limitations to what naval force can do. But I think what was interesting was that this characterization of narco-terrorist. Now, there's no doubt there is a overlap between narcotics and terrorism, although the terrorism, of course, is the use of political force or sort of violence in pursuit of political measures. So I think the overlap, though, is more one of convenience. And the idea that narco-terrorists are out there to make political impacts through the use of force, I just don't buy it, I'm afraid. It's a mischaracterization. It's all too easy. And we saw this in both the war on terror and the war on drugs, to actually characterize something as a war when actually it's a much more sophisticated and difficult thing to do.
So let's go down that path, because that is crucial, especially right here at the beginning here. You have the war on drugs, which I think you're right, started in the Reagan administration, was a complete failure. They just stopped doing it after a long period of time. You had the war on terror, which just happened for a long time, a couple of decades, and then we just sort of moved on, and we just haven't really thought much about it anymore because we didn't get hit, so must be fine. So we'll just kind of move on with that. And then you're talking about this one here now, especially because you have some specific experience at this with the British. Did you stop the narcotics traffickers in the area because of your naval operations? And is there a prospect that we can succeed where you may not have?
We did, but I say we stopped, but we certainly were involved in a very significant seizure. I think it might have been about something like £50,000 worth of £50,000 in weight of cocaine. Was street value about £60 million from memory. It sort of made almost, I think it might have even made the front page in the UK. We just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But if you ask me, did we stop the traffic? Then obviously not. And I think the issue is that it's not just about interdiction. The issue is that if you focus just on interdiction, then you're only treating what is essentially a symptom of a much more economic and dynamic and societal issue. Because what you tended to see, when I was doing this, we were working harder on what I would say supply, the supply side of drugs rather than the demand side. But if you don't do both, then you're in deep trouble. Because you can interdict as much as you like, but the traffickers will find ways around it and through it. And we know this because cocaine presumably is still as available in the States as it is here, even further away, and so on and so forth with all the other drugs. The primary ones in those days were cannabis, cocaine, and heroin. But it was the cocaine, I think, was the one which tended to focus on because it was coming from South America to North America, whereas of course there were different routes for heroin, and cannabis could be grown in the United States, could be grown in the Caribbean. It's quite widespread. So there were three different drugs. But you've really got to take an all arms approach, by which I mean look at the supply reduction, look at demand reduction, and understand that this is something that you're probably going to be doing for an enduring period with a regime which is ideally one that can cover the whole area.
Now, you mentioned a minute ago, you addressed some of the legality issues and some of the questions that we have. Hegseth was also asked that same question, and he had this rather curious answer.
Mr. Secretary, what legal authority did the Pentagon invoke to strike that boat full of drug smugglers?
We have the absolute and complete authority to conduct that. First of all, just the defense of the American people alone. 100,000 Americans were killed each year under the previous administration because of an open border and open drug traffic flow.
Was there an
That is an
imminent-
assault on the American people. Every boatload of any form of drug that poisons the American people is an imminent threat. And at the DOD, our job is to defeat imminent threats. A foreign terrorist organization poisoning your people with drugs coming from a drug cartel is no different than al-Qaeda. And they'll be treated as such as they were in international
Was there an
laws.
imminent connection?
And is there a provision in international law where if you designate a drug cartel as a terrorist threat, that you can kill them at will?
None that I can think of. I mean, it's many years since I studied international law, but none that I can think of. I can think of no legal regime within the law of the sea, UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention for Law on the Sea. I can think of nothing within that which would authorize this. And where do you stop? Because I don't know where that bombing was made, Danny, but I would be surprised if it was close to continental US. I would, from the look of it, I would expect it to be somewhere in the Caribbean and somewhere in the deep Caribbean. So, in other words, in somebody else's waters. And that could either be their territorial waters, which is 12 miles from the coast, or more likely their exclusive economic zone.
I believe I saw that it was headed to Dominican Republic, not to the United States.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but that makes sense. I mean, what we did do is we used to patrol what were called the choke points. So, between some of these major island groups, because you knew that people would have to run through them, and that was a very good place to actually focus. But I can think of no legal regime, international legal regime, and I'd struggle on national legal regimes as well, which would allow you to attack criminals in that way. The only characterize them as terrorists, I mean, it just doesn't cut it in terms of understanding how terrorism is defined. Terrorism is the use of political violence, so the use of violence for political purposes against civilians. And we've seen that in other regimes, but this to me it's a criminal offence which is being confronted using military force of the nature of what we've just seen.
Right, and there's something about this that just doesn't feel right to me, because number one, this came literally out of nowhere. No one had been talking about, man, there's all this trouble going on from drug traffickers coming across the sea, especially in the Caribbean, and man, we're going to have to do something. And finally they did something. It was not even on the radar. Now, the only thing that kind of was on the radar was Trump has been saying really since the beginning that he might use lethal military power like special forces in Mexico to try and interdict some of the things there. I think that's a terrible idea. I hope we never do that. But other than that, that was about the end of it. And yet you had Secretary of State Rubio seem to zero in on one particular egregious violator of this drug traffic.
You're wrong in your question. Number one, Venezuela is a major source. And the reason why is the following. And I've seen a lot of this reporting, and it's fake reporting, and I'll tell you why. It says that somehow Venezuela is not involved in the drug trade because the UN says they're not involved in the UN. I don't care what the UN says. The UN doesn't know what they're talking about. Maduro is indicted by a grand jury in the Southern District of New York. That means the Southern District of New York presented the evidence to a grand jury, and a grand jury indicted him. And then a superseding indictment came out that was unsealed about 1.5 years ago that specifically detailed Maduro's actions. So number one, let there be no doubt, Nicolas Maduro is an indicted drug trafficker in the United States, and he's a fugitive of American justice.
Okay, Gary, if you could throw that naval map back up there again. One of the things that really sticks out to me, these U.S. Coast Guard cutters you mentioned, there's 3 of them in here that are patrolling this large area. All the rest of these are destroyers or missile carriers, which don't seem that they would be suited at all for just interdiction kind of things or stopping the drug trade in a certain area. I'm sure that's not what they were designed for. But what do you make of him hitting so hard on Venezuela, as opposed to all these other places where the drugs are physically coming out of, like Colombia or several places in Latin America? Why the focus on Venezuela?
There will no doubt be, Danny, because if you look at the chart that you're looking at, which you can see is Venezuela, and just over to the right of the A is Trinidad and Tobago. Now that, and there are the Dutch islands there as well. So there's no doubt that there are trafficking routes which would run from Venezuela up through the Caribbean. And those trafficking routes, that funny things happen because drugs arrive in places like Trinidad, which because it's got quite a large Indian population, tends to have more alcohol problems than actually drug problems. Whereas when you get into the Afro-Caribbean communities, it's more about the use of drugs. But you get people dropping off drugs in places like, let's just make one up, but Dominica and places like this on the Windward Islands, which are to the right of the 4, 5, and 6 on the chart. And in those islands, then often there is the drugs will arrive as cocaine, and then there'll be the smuggler may well pay for what he's doing by actually selling cocaine into the local market, and that in turn increases drug problems in the Caribbean islands. Or the other thing they'll always do is they'll have corrupt people, be it politicians, be it judges, be it policemen, because the earnings in these countries, which are middle-income countries, are much lower than the States, and the bribes that can be paid to them are very high indeed. But in terms of Venezuela, I haven't seen the evidence to say whether Maduro is a drugs trafficker or not. I'd be astonished personally if he is. But that said, if the evidence is firm, then that's another thing. But without having seen that evidence, Venezuela was never the real focus. As a transit location, yes, but not really as a production location. It was very much Colombia. Original production, so growth was in Bolivia and Ecuador. And the west of Brazil, but production was in Colombia, and then really things then started to move north, either via the Central America or via the Caribbean. So I just wonder if there's something else going on here, because I think I may have said as far back as our original podcast, all those, or nearly a year ago, I think it was, that I've often wondered whether or not the United States would be interested in regime change in Venezuela. It's something which has been attempted elsewhere, as we know. I think, as Larry Johnson said, that there are actually over 80 regime changes run by the United States since the end of the Second World War.
I don't know about that number, but I do know that in the first Trump administration, they very clumsily tried to get a regime change against Maduro by supporting Juan Guaido, et cetera. That was disastrously failed. So we seem to be giving it another shot here.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, and if there would be two reasons. Firstly, it's the political reason, because, of course, of Maduro's leanings. But of course, the other thing is that, and I come back to my experience in the energy sector, which is Venezuela has very large still oil reserves. It's a sort of lower grade oil in one way, but they're very, very big indeed. And I have for some time thought that as the peak oil situation occurs, and there's good evidence to say that it's occurred now, that as it becomes clear that the shale fields in America are a time-limited resource, because they actually, with a shale play, they're quick to start to produce, Danny, but within 6 months they're usually at maximum production, and within about sort of 18 months they're down to 40%, and within 30 months they're down to zero. I'm a great fan of an American geophysicist called petroleum geologist called Art Berman, who you know, and he actually talks about shale as a sort of the final play of American oil, because actually it is in truth really low quality oil, and it's expensive to extract as well. So although American production is high at the moment, in fact I think it might be as high as it has been, largely that's speaking due to the shale revolution, although it isn't really a revolution, because actually we've known how to extract shale for nearly 100 years, but now it's suddenly because we're running out.
Economically viable, yeah.
It's becoming. So I just wonder if this is about. There's more about this, and whether you want, for example, to get, do Exxon want to play in Venezuela? I imagine they'd love it. So I don't know. Perhaps I'm just putting two and two together and making 27. I don't know. But I've always thought that one of those things that might well happen is that as it becomes clear that the amount of oil that's available to do all the stuff that we want to do in the world is going to start to decrease, then I imagine that America would actually have a very good look at Venezuela. Who knows?
Yeah, I pray to God that's not the case, but we certainly have a lot of dark experience with doing things that are shady like that almost always backfire. I mean, just look at the problems we have with Iran today. You can almost trace them, almost all of them, back to 1953 when we over-oil, unseated the legally elected government to try to put somebody in that we liked, and, well, that basically paved the path to the mullahs, and we still have trouble to this day. But we'll have to wait and see where all that goes. But we really appreciate you coming on today, especially with this, a lot of experience you've had in the Caribbean, and especially with energy. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, the pleasure's mine. Pleasure's mine, Danny. Look forward to talking to you next time. We can get back to Ukraine and the usual stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not going anywhere. So I'm sure plenty more to talk about right there. But we really appreciate it. We appreciate you guys too. Hope you have a good weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.